Dune, Forrest Gump, Benjamin Button. Eric Roth is the guy who wrote all those screenplays, and he's been nominated for an Oscar 7 times, and he won the Academy Award for Best Screenplay with Forrest Gump. I asked him things like, how do you find a theme? What can you do in your writing to really move people? What's it like to work with David Fincher and Steven Spielberg and Martin Scorsese? What's that like? Let's begin. The thing I want to start with is, you said you were writing today, and you're still writing kind of every day from page one. From page one.
Well, yes. I mean, it's sometimes I don't touch page one, but yes, I always start from page one.
So tell me about that.
Well, it's a way of keeping myself involved with the material where I'm living it, in a way that I also sort of, I call it sort of a sense of erosion, that if there's things that need to be fixed and backfilled, like dirt piled back up, that I could see that, and I see mistakes, and I see, so when I'm done with my first draft, which could take me a while, but I think I've covered it pretty much, and then of course, after you read it, you hate it. And then you say, why did I bother doing this? But yeah, I start on page one every day. Yeah.
Tell me about erosion.
Well, I mean, it's probably not the right word for it, but it's like trying to shore up what is kind of falling down. That's how I look at it. So why is this not quite working? How do I make this as close to as imaginative as it can be, fresh, something surprising, the kind of things you want to have in anything you write, So when I see something feels tired, I want to make it feel alive,
Do you ever find that when you're writing it for the first time, you're like sparkling with enthusiasm, and then you kind of come back to the end and it loses that life? Or do you feel like you kind of know intuitively now when something has life?
I think I've always felt that I knew what had life. I don't know what that is. I mean, I mean, this is an odd thing to say, but I've never had writer's block. I love that I get to write, so every day is kind of an adventure in that sense. It's almost corny, that I can be a journalist one day and be a prose writer. I think I'm probably a frustrated novelist because I haven't written a novel, but I write a lot of prose in my screenplays. I always tell this kind of cute story that we were doing, I did a movie, Benjamin Button, and they were doing a read through, and they were reading the narration, which was the text. And Brad Pitt said, "Oh, look at Eric. He's got a prose boner." And I probably did. Yeah, that's a story I've told many times, but I've always got a kick out of it. But I think, a frustrated novelist. So it's a little more difficult now because if you're going to write a lot of prose, the scripts are going to be probably longer than people want to see them. But to be concise is also difficult, maybe even more difficult,
And how do your scripts compare to other screenwriter scripts? Like when you turn something in and people are like, "Oh, that's an Eric script." What does it have about it?
I don't know. You'd have to probably ask somebody else what they find attractive about it or not attractive. Many don't get made too. I think I'm particularly visual. More importantly, I think my scripts are particularly human and very emotional. The characters all are singular to themselves. I mean, I believed a long time ago about you have to be true to the psychology of a character so that the voices are all different. I always tell this story too, that I did a rewrite for a movie that Michael Cimino made called The Year of the Dragon, which was an okay movie and interesting. But I saw that he had given Mickey Rourke a wallet that had all the stuff about this particular character's life. And I'm sure Mickey Rourke never looked at the wallet, but he knew in his back pocket was a picture of his supposed daughter. I mean, some things obvious, some things less, maybe a saying that he thought was interesting and put in there, or a old crumpled phone number, but something that, and as an aggregate, it's a life you form. If you're trying, I don't, novelist, poet, anybody, you're trying to make something out of nothing, or in my case, I do mostly adaptations, and even though I think I'd say a good 60-70% of the adaptations I do become original only because either bad books make good movies. That's the slogan, or uh, bad plays make better movies. But um, adaptations, I think they give you something to look back at. In other words, even if it's not very good.
Tell me this, we got a lot to talk about here, but I wanna jump back to the psychology. You're talking about true to the psychology of the character. Paint that picture for me. What do you mean?
Well, I mean, I think that you have to know something about his backstory, something or hers. What makes this person tick? Why are they neurotic, or why are they giddy, or why are they quiet, or what makes them angry? I mean, all those things. You do it as hopefully as concisely as you can within the thing, but that everybody should be different. In other words, everybody is different, and so that you can find some pretty unique characters within, I hope, my scripts, and, obviously in good really great writers' stuff, but they come with surprises and, curiosity, all those things.
So if I think of something like Forrest Gump, I think of his voice, I think of his relationship with mom, I think of, how he, is dressed, always very simple, the sort of simple wisdom of the character. So what else is it as you're building a character and you're kind of beginning
Well,
to create that
with
fire?
him, with that character, that was from a book. I mean, so it's semi-given, even though the book was particularly farcical. The guy's supposed to weigh 400 pounds, and, so I got to take off and and it was as much about me looking back on my life from that point, which when I was probably 50, what had passed, and that started to resonate with, people who went to see the movie because it was all these touchstone moments in all of our lives, at that point. And I was aware of that. I was aware of that, that they and I time is very important to me. Time is, of the essence in a way, um, and memories, and remembrances, but, that character I knew less of, but I somehow I heard his voice, and so I knew, sort of in this simplistic way, because it's a very simplistic movie. I mean, it's not exactly high sophistication, but, he seemed human to people. He had, 2 or 3 things he loved, like his mother, his girl he loved, Jenny, and I guess God in America or something. And, and also there was, Quentin Tarantino said this about it, that he felt it was the most ironic mainstream movie ever made. And whether it is or not, I don't know, but
Why is that?
well, the ironies of, like, you know, uh uh, he gets to go to the White House and he meets John Kennedy, and then, Bob added some humor, wonderful humor. Bob Zemeckis is a really terrific guy and terrific artist, and, you have a picture of, Marilyn Monroe in the bathroom, or whatever. I call them ironies, maybe they're not quite maybe they are ironic, some of it, just, how everybody got shot, we would do those kind of runs,
With a movie like that, Forrest, and even, Benjamin Button, one takes place in Alabama, the other New Orleans, and how do you get that sense of the Southern accent, the Southern way of speaking? Is that something that you do deliberately research or anything like
I
that?
I research a lot. Yeah, I do a lot of research. So the best thing that ever happened was the internet. I mean, I have
Hmm.
in the backyard here like sheds filled with research books before there was a internet. But I don't know. It's just a sound you get, but I think it's also the characters. Then the actors obviously can portray them in a Southern way. I never thought of it that way. I mean, in other words, I just thought that these people are Southerners, and I don't know if I even know that much about the South, particularly. More so on a movie I'm just finishing a script for now about the mafia coming to New Orleans in 1890. I'm doing it for Marty,
Hmm.
and we'll see what happens with it. But this does kind of embrace the Southern, about the sort of the wisteria and the sort of the difference in time, the way time kind of moves in the South. I mean, whether it does or not, I don't know, but yeah, sort of a Southern way. Um, Used to be sort of this fake sort of chivalry and gallantry, and, you know,
But it's in the details that things come
God is in the
alive, right?
details. I mean, you can't get if the details are no good, you're not gonna succeed in any way.
And that's gonna come out of the research, the
Research, the
voice.
voice, and then maybe things I've lived even, you know? Like, Benjamin Button's a good example because I wanted to do something that was kind of out of the ordinary with it, and I remembered a scene in, P.T. Anderson's movie Magnolia. I think it's the opening where, I know a lot about movies and remember movies distinctly, and, I think, a young man was committing suicide jumping out of a window, a floor above where his parents lived, and the father was, I don't know, testing a shotgun or something, so he shot his son on the way down, so anyhow, but so I then got about 5 of these books, the Darwin Awards, they're called, and that's where I came up with 4 or 5 of the characters. There was a man who got hit by lightning 7 times. There was,
Mm.
whatever some of those characters were. So I said, if I could humanize them and make them seem real and have whatever problems they really have, aside from the sort of extraordinary events that affected them, that'd be interesting. And so that's what happened.
And I guess the tugboats came out of research in Button too.
Tugboat, yeah, and then because I wanted to put it on a tugboat, I had that caption, and then I had to find out, was there ever a tugboat incident with a submarine? So it gets pretty specific in World War II, and there was. There's a sort of famous thing with which is exactly what happened in the movie where the tugboat rammed the submarine as it was coming up, and a number of people had gotten killed. But there was a tugboat, a guy who made tugboats for sale at a little shop in, I think, Massachusetts, and he told me all this stuff. He gave me all the information.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things also is with voice, like, you have this way of bringing the voice out in the characters, like in Button, the mom, like, she says, "Oh, that baby's still a child of God." And, like, I really feel, like, her soul. But I was thinking about what is the one that I remember the most, that I quote the most, and it's Bubba. When he goes, "Anyway, like I was saying, shrimp is the fruit of the sea.
You can barbecue it, boil it, broil it, bake it, saute it.
Boom, 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 boom. Shrimp and potatoes, shrimp burger, shrimp sandwich." That's
About it.
and I gotta know, like, where is that voice coming from? Because it's vivid. Like,
Well,
that is the God in
once
the
I
details
thought
stuff.
about that, and it was with them doing 2 or 3 things in their duties as soldiers. I think they're cleaning a floor with toothbrushes and however we staged it, and I was just sitting. So I said, I think I'll give every possible thing I can think of with shrimps. What you can do with shrimp. And I was sitting with my family. We were in a vacation house that we happened to own in Canada, and everybody was sitting around, and I would just yell, "Give me shrimp dishes," and I would type them, as they gave me the dishes, So, so we eventually ran out. I think, I think what I like about that and is not it's not unusual because I'll find other things that happen like that,
Hmm.
and then not necessarily do it with my family, but you find that, well, that's interesting. How do we then, dramatize that and make it feel uh, something that resonates? That
Hmm.
it feels like something that would make the thing more special, that will be remembered. With movies, I always feel like there's something primal about them that they stay with you. Books too. I mean, in other words, when you visualize a character. But movies, at least in particular, to some extent, when there are things that stay in your soul, I guess you say, it's not that I search for that, but I'd like to have things that have become memorable in some way that will then start defining the movie.
And how do you think about creating those memorable characters? Is it the voice? Is it the
I think
values?
it's all of them, all of it. In other words, I think you start with, at least I start with, what's the theme of the movie? What's the movie literally about? It's not,
Hmm.
this isn't a story. This is something else. This is about, you know, uh, what is the, why are we writing? Why are you doing this all together? Sometimes it's just a good story, but you need more than that. I think you have to have some thematic about what you're trying to say. There's always going to be underneath it, so that when you have a scene that feels inert, that you have to find a way to somehow utilize it with the theme of the movie. People have different ideas what the themes are, which is okay if you're sort of somehow oddly on the same page at some point. Um, yeah, thematics is very important. The other thing that's important is to try to, and I'm not sure I've mastered it. The great writers know how to write in subtextually. They don't write what's you're kind of literal. They'll say it in like a metaphor or in some other way that's saying the exact same thing. But in other words, they're not saying what is sort of evident.
Mm-hmm.
And you get sort of it's hard, and it's very hard to do that. And really only the great writers can do it very well. Some just do it instinctively.
So walk me through something that maybe started off as explicit where you said, I got to bake this into the subtext.
I'll give you something that somebody else wrote. I did a play of High Noon, and so Carl Foreman wrote the original screenplay, and I'm only because it's on my mind. There's a part of a scene where a judge is telling Gary Cooper's now about to leave on his honeymoon and leave this town and what's going to happen. And he's giving an example of what happens from Athens, Greece. So he's not talking about him on the bench, this judge. He's talking about something that happened in Athens. So it was about a jurist even maybe, but it was more about what is sort of like going to haunt this whole thing. In other words, they didn't really get justice. I forget what it was exactly, but when you do it through some other whole story about someone burned their hand, or really good writers can do it, about what memories are for kids or something. But it's not about what the sort of screenwriting 101 is that people tell you exposition as about what's going to happen, saying, and all they're doing is laying out the story in a certain way. And it's just not very good writing, I don't think. It's television does it a lot. I'm just, more traditional shows. But sophisticated writing, if you can get there, is you talk about things that don't seem that they may even apply, but then when you think about it, they're just great metaphors. I mean, the great writers, David Mamet can do it. I mean, they do it in their sleep almost,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just hard to do. And it's the first thing I like to try to teach writers to try to do. Talk about a dream you had rather than tell us that you're upset with your mother. You know what I'm saying? You're telling your brother, I'm upset with my mother. Maybe it's better to do it off, sort of off center. Yeah. It's very hard to do it though. And it's also hard, so you don't become pretentious with it. And it's tricky. It's just tricky, but it's much better than two brothers exchanging information that they both know. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
I mean, there was a director I worked with. He said the worst line of exposition was, "Good morning, Mr. Water Commissioner." Now, maybe they could have found a different way to do that,
So go back to the dream thing. So if you're talking about the dream, explain what makes that such better writing.
I think you're getting 2 or 3 layers of things. You're getting whatever the information is you want to give the audience about what's the problem or what's happy or emotional between these two people. Then you get a kind of a sort of a fortune cookie aspect of it, some kind of lesson for life if you're able to do without becoming pretentious. And then in the day, you might even find a way it's surprising because it's not exactly what you thought it was going to be, So you get a whole host of possibilities within just just one. It can be monologue or it could be just 10 sentences, but you have a way of expressing things in a very more sophisticated way.
The question I'm getting at here is, do you go on the emotional journey that we go on as viewers sitting in your office?
I think I do. Yeah,
You
I
do.
think I do.
Yeah,
And I try to do the dialogue, and it's always it sounds so bad because first of all, probably every voice sounds the same coming from me saying it out loud, because I'm not an actor. I'm self-conscious about it, actually acting. And, but I try to think of, will this be emotional? If it's emotional to me, will this be emotional to an audience? And I think I've succeeded a number of times in doing that. Sometimes better than others, you know.
I mean, on the phone with a friend this morning, he said there's 2 movies that just make me weep every time, Gump and Benjamin Button.
Oh yeah,
And he
nice.
said, "The same guy wrote both of those?"
Well, yeah, I think they're similar in certain ways. Some people have taken me to task feeling that they're too similar, but I always say, well, gee, Marty Scorsese, you don't mind making 4 movies about the mafia, you know what I'm
Right.
saying? And even though he's a genius, but uh, yeah, they're both. I think all in all, I hope that most of my movies are about people and about how they're dealing with problems and what is meaningful to them, and where you then start feel tapped into how emotionally they're handling things, whether and you're moved by it. I mean, I liked, even though it was melodramatic at some point, that the work I did on Star is Born. I
Mm.
mean, I loved the whole audience was just sobbing, saying now maybe it's kind of a cheap sob because the guy's committed suicide, but it's an emotional thing, and that movie's really kind of held its own. It's lasted,
Mhm.
which is really nice. I think everything I write, I try to give some human quality to it that will make people feel something.
If you're trying to feel something, are you a coffee drinker? Because I would imagine
No.
that could so that's a strong
Never
no.
I never street never drank coffee in my life.
That's a strong no.
I never liked the taste of it. I don't drink liquor either, so
Huh. Yeah, well, that's interesting because then there's a
drugs, I'll give you
sobriety.
too many. Hallucinogenics of everyone known to man, except for ayahuasca. I've never tried that. I guess I should.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
So you're sitting up there and, I mean, certainly you're not always trying to get to some of those more emotional moments, but I think that's what stands out. I mean, for me, I was just getting ready for this, and I went into YouTube, started watching some clips from Button, and I couldn't watch them. They just moved me too much.
Yeah, I think they were quite emotional. Well, it was, also a personal experience. I lost both my parents while I was writing it.
That's right.
Yeah, so that it I was affected by that, and I said, "How can I somehow, I don't know, translate this to an audience to," uh and then David, Fincher, who I love so much, he really bent over backwards to try to make this work, which I think was not the usual movie David would make,
Hmm.
you know what I'm saying? But, he tried to I think it had to do with maybe the loss of his father, not that year, but, so there's a humanity in David that's wonderful, and he was willing to go to kind of into a different direction, and he's much tougher and, colder in a good way, and, so he was willing to take a sort of the emotional quality of that and make it feel, important.
Is it okay if I ask questions about the death of your family
You
and
can ask anything.
Okay, well, I just wanna be
Anything you
respectful.
wanna know, sexually, anything you wanna
All
know.
right, well, who knows where we'll be in 10 minutes now. No, but does that show up in Daisy's character? Like, walk me through Daisy's
Daisy's
character.
character, I'm trying to think because it's a combination. Um, my ex-wife, was a big ballet main
Hmm,
about dancing,
yeah.
so I made her a ballet dancer. So that was really important
It's all
to
about the line.
the line, exactly, and then that led to me to the whole, which I think is pretty clever, the sliding doors thing with if the cab hadn't been late, and the thing where she ends up getting hit by a car, which then changed her life because she got her legs where she couldn't use them as ballet anymore. But that once I could, so that was it. I looked back, and this is set at a whole different era, but what was a ballet then? It was Balanchine, and, that was the research I did, and then you start looking at the things that could be so beautiful from it. So one thing sort of starts going on top of another. So, like, when I was writing that, I know my wife's name was Deborah, and it's still Deborah, um, but, I would go to the ballet with her, and it was just so beautiful, and the music's so beautiful, and so who is this person who's a ballet dancer? And And then how does she meet this guy, and then what does that mean? And when she has a child and the child's growing backwards, all that stuff, I mean, it's like at the end of that movie, it's just so gorgeous to me when she has that little baby, that's this man she loved. And so
What's my name? What's my name?
it's pretty amazing. I love that movie. Yeah. I don't think it's perfect by any means. And I think you probably would, now you could probably make it where it's almost flawless with the prosthetics and everything. They don't need to probably do a lot of that anymore. I did this little movie called Here that didn't work for anybody except for us.
Huh.
Even though now I think someone told me there's a whole subculture who's kind of embraced this movie as kind of pretty genius, and we'll see. But uh, there again, it was about that was Bob Zemeckis and I wrote it together, and he directed Tom Hanks and Robin Wright, and it's about time passing. What happens to a family, and it's just the stuff I'm interested in.
So if you're writing something like that, how did you think of the different layering of time? Because there was a lot of work that happened visually to communicate that, but I would imagine that's hard to do as
It
you're
was
writing the
hard to do. Yeah,
script.
we had to really keep track of, and then I realized how hard it was going to be for Bob with all the art direction they'd have
Yeah.
to do. Keep what's the lamps look like and everything else.
Right.
Um, but we were. I mean, it had a sort of logic to it. That was in keeping with what the piece was about.
And what happened? You found the comic book and you said,
No,
"Hey, I
no,
wanna make a movie from this?"
I called Bob. I wanted to do Contact 2.
Huh.
I said, "Is
That's a
there?"
big jump.
I know. I said, "Is that something we could do, Bob?" And he said, "Well, it's very problematic. The Carl Sagan's estate or the wife or somebody owns the whole thing. And it's a little more problem." He said, "But you know what? I have this book." Here's how he talks. "I have this book here, and uh, take a look at this graphic novel and see if you think this is a movie." And I did. I said, "This is great. I love the whole idea of this. That it's all wherever you are in some space and time. This is what the lives are that you lead. And this happens to be the one, but there had been all sorts of other people that lived in the same house. So it reminded me of City of God that did a wonderful thing with people who lived in an apartment. And
Hmm.
I mean, the whole thing of time and place is amazing. I mean, one of the reasons Marty and I, Scorsese, get along so well is we both love Proust.
Yeah.
And so this whole idea of what does time mean? I mean, how is it? And it's how you can't stop it, So you have to appreciate it in some way. And it becomes a big crushing force in your life and to the good too.
Well, that's what's so unique about Gump Button here is we see the arc of a life. I mean, here the part that melted me was just when they get divorced, and
Yeah, sure, sure.
there's just been so
Yeah, I
long
thought it was a
when
beautiful speech when she has that cake and she said,
yeah.
I never went to Paris. I never got to go to Yellowstone in the summer." Whatever she gives, all the things that we miss out on. And so she finally gets to do them. I was also I loved a little thing I wrote, which is kind of sappy, but we had this kind of Thanksgiving of them together, and he says they agreed that she was going to bring Chinese food, and so I made that up, and then I said, "Let's see how this works." And I said, "Let's start." He has a thing where he says, "Let's start a new tradition. Open the fortune cookies first," which is only so I can get the scene written, and he opens one and it says, "An old love will come back to you." And she says, he said, "Is that true?" And she said, "No." Yeah. But, and I actually was then somebody said, maybe that wasn't even the fortune that was in the fortune. Maybe he just made that up. I don't like that.
You have so many one-liners that are iconic, and let's go back to Button because 'cause you're right, we're meant to lose the people we love. How else would we know how important they are?
Yeah, I don't know why these things come. I mean, I'm always nervous about them. They're going to sound completely pretentious, and maybe they are. One of the things that's interesting about the button is that I wrote a speech I'm really proud of that's in there about that Brad Pitt gives about part of a letter he's supposed to be reading aloud to his daughter, even though he's all over the world. And he says things like, I don't know, there's no rules to this. If you found that you're not doing it the way you wish you were, then you can start all over and all this. And so people have made it into like a plaque, they have it on their walls, but they've attributed to F. Scott Fitzgerald.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I wrote it, and it's that because it's from his short story,
Right.
which was actually a magazine article. But it was always funny. It's like, gee, I know he's a better writer than me. This is pretty good, though.
I'm trying to kind of bring all these things together, but it's funny because just your presence, very down to earth, and you've written so many lines that are very iconic, sentimental, valuable to people. But then you keep saying, but I don't want it to almost be cheesy or something like that. And you
well,
kind of
gotta be
draw this
careful.
very fine line.
Yeah, well, you have to try to be careful. I don't think you also necessarily set out to write these things. Maybe you hope they'll become something. I mean, Forrest Gump's a little easier because he would speak with aphorisms, about things, and sometimes there just aren't enough rocks, or stupid is as stupid does. I mean, all the stuff that he said. If they worked for people, they become memorable. That was a lucky byproduct. That's all I could say.
I mean, even in Gump, the classic one is life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. But the book line is being an idiot
is
no box of chocolates.
Yeah. I don't know why I changed this. I don't know. I have no idea. That's what it felt like to me. Yeah. I mean, I'm not even sure that makes much sense. Life is like a box of chocolates. Never know what you're going to get. Yeah, I guess, that wouldn't be my favorite one, even though that may be the most memorable.
Mm-hmm.
I liked the sometimes there just aren't enough rocks when she's throwing those rocks at that house. And you can't undo things that happened and made you traumatized and everything else, But many times I try to write things that would be, hopefully would be remembered,
Yeah.
And for that movie in particular, yeah. I'm just trying to think what I'm writing now, I think there might be some things that are kind of memorable, some of the sayings. The early mafia in Sicily had a saying, "We do what we must." And I have that a lot.
What does that mean?
It means that we're going to do what we have to do to sort of protect ourselves, protect, our honor, whatever it is. And then so that it's used a bunch of times, it's like, think of The Godfather, the great things that came out of that, it's like, make him an offer he can't refuse. And, take the cannoli, leave the gun. And, I mean, it's just so many great, great lines. And I'm sure they didn't think of it that way. They just came out of, what was natural to the people's language.
When you're writing characters, do you find them saying things that you feel like you would have never said? Or are you like, no, I feel like I got a good grasp of these people?
Honestly, I don't think they're real, the people. I mean, I'm not sure I'm going for some authenticity within their characters, but unless I'm doing something that's more like The Insider, which is about real people, I don't know. Otherwise, I see them as fanciful in a way. In other words, even though I try to make them feel like that they have a life, they have their issues, they have a whole, body of corpus delicti and all that, and they're somebody who exists, but these are, I call them the other side of the moon. In other words, that these are, really good movies last, but it's almost like I say they're other side of the moon because, it still can feel like Fredo and Michael and The Godfather, where he's saying, when he kisses him, he said, "I loved you," and, and don't you ever, whatever. But it's almost like it's ongoing, it's like with Forrest Gump, it's even if I see it's on television, if I'm flipping the channels, I'll stop and I'll watch it till the end, So, but I think great movies kind of last, And I guess great literature does, and music and all these things that are part of you. But I always liked this idea that these people are all living these lives while we're going about ours, that they're real to that extent. But it's all fiction,
Yeah.
It's nothing real about them.
So you use the word fanciful. So where does fanciful kind of end and caricature, cartoonish
I think
begins?
you got to be real careful. Yeah, I think that's what you want to try to avoid, so that they do feel real, even though you're going in knowing they're not.
Right.
That Forrest Gump to me was Candide, which is a famous play about kind of a guy who's just going through life, and what's coming comes and what doesn't come doesn't come. And it's a little unusual because it always has the same 3-act or 4-act Shakespearean structure. I don't care who you are, what you're doing, you can't break that. The real simplistic version is you state the problem in the first act, complicate the problem in the second act, third act, you resolve it or don't resolve it, whatever you decide to do. And it doesn't matter. You can stand it on its head. You can do it backwards and forwards, and it always will have 3 acts. You'll come to eventually a catharsis or a deus ex machina, God in the machine. And that's just part and parcel of what it is to dramatize something. I mean, it's always interesting to me. Like I wrote a version of Cleopatra, which I thought I did a pretty good job, but I knew the same material that Shakespeare did because they really didn't have anything that was contemporaneous with her, very little bit. So it's like from a historian 150 years later, but he had the same, these were real people, and it's hard to believe because of all the things that, that you think about them. None of that's fanciful though. I'm talking more about these kind of, what's the word, even the miasmic kind of quality of a Forrest Gump or something. They're just not real, but they take on a reality for that 2.5 hours.
And when you see a character in a book, in a movie that you feel like is wooden, that's hollow, what's usually off?
I don't like it. I don't like, I'll even start books where if I don't think the names seem accurate to, where they feel like they're invented, I sort of stop reading. Yeah. I mean, I'm mixture because I want some authenticity, but on the other hand, I don't mind people being, as you say, almost cartoon to some extent. But I'd rather they were felt as, people cry not because they're cartoons in Forrest Gump. People embrace them thinking this is somebody worth caring about.
Yeah. This from the beginning of The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. You say, as all things do, it begins in the dark. Eyes blink open, blue eyes. The first thing they see is a woman near 40, standing, looking out a window, watching the wind blowing, rattling a window. So, what's going on there? And how are you thinking about what makes for
I
a good
thought
opening?
about that it begins in the dark because it's like somebody being born.
Oh, wow.
In other words, that's the darkness. In other words, everything begins in the dark. And then that for that, because the baby being born. Then there's the prose that I wrote to put you in the situation of, already the blue eyes and a woman in her 40s. So you already know this woman exists, probably his mother, I guess. And then I guess it's a good cinema moment just because it's just this big, but that when she's standing at the wind's rattling it. I like that. I use that a lot. I mean, not the wind rattling windows, but that I like when people in movies have their clothes are being ruffled by wind or something. It stops time to a certain extent. I did that today. I wrote something actually similar. It was a church wedding that's going on, and there's sort of it's very windy outside. It's supposed to be in New Orleans, and the windows are rattling in the church. And so, and then the director has choice to how much he wants to make them rattle or not rattle at all. He may think it's stupid, but it'll give you a feeling of the time and place. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So that even in that's pretty good, I think, because that tells you a lot in the space of like 2 sentences. I think I always know the beginning scenes and the end scene. And the only one in any movie I've ever written that changed was in Munich. He moved it. It was, I think, just on the street in Brooklyn, but he moved it to be outside the World Trade Center, which is no longer there, when he filmed the movie.
Right.
So, but otherwise, I think opening scenes are incredibly important. So you just, bringing the audience in, and then the ending, you have to hopefully get right so that they leave feeling either exalted by what they just saw, or moved by it, or, that there's still lots to do with the theme of it. With Forrest Gump, it's a feather about, is it destiny, or is it, just random, and then where's it going to go next? Because everybody has their own life, so those are all the things you think about, and then you have to try to visualize them when you're doing a movie, so that they are made clear to an audience what you're saying.
So when Brad Pitt makes the joke about prose, he's talking about what we just read.
Yes.
Versus just the dialogue.
Yeah. No, it's more than that. I mean, many people now will write maybe just 2 lines. It's fall in Brooklyn, and it'll go exterior Brooklyn night. It's fall, and then they'll go into the scene. Yeah, it may be just a dialogue. Yeah.
So that means you're very visual as you're
I
thinking
like
about
to be.
things.
I like to be very visual. Some directors don't like it. They think I'm giving too much, because I also give tone in it, and sometimes they don't like that, which is the tone I think it should be.
Her name is Daisy Fuller. She speaks with a southern lilt.
Nice. Yeah. Well, she does.
That's exactly what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
Like that's
And now, but the director may not feel she speaks with a southern lilt.
So with the dialogue, what are you looking at, Caroline? The wind, mother. They say a hurricane is on its way. You've been asleep. I was waiting to see you. Why start the movie there?
Sometimes it's good to start at the end, and then you can go back and tell us why they're there. I don't know. That's a good question. Felt right, I guess.
Tell me more about the themes of, you find the theme, you bring out the theme, and you kind of come back to it over and over again. And once again, the core tension that has shown up, the thread through all of this conversation, is making a lot of these things simple and explicit, but teetering at the edge of going too far cartoonish, where you almost pollute the whole thing and cheapen it.
Well, a lot of people don't like Forrest Gump, for instance. They think it's saccharine, or that's not real emotion, ersatz emotion, which is fine. I mean, it's like just the way the ball bounces, I think Killers of the Flower Moon, which is one of the better movies I think I wrote, is about justice, and inevitably about justice, how these people didn't get any justice. In other words, and you could probably say 14 other things, but that was always on my mind. Justice. Yeah. I mean, in other words, what do we do to them? Never mind man's inhumanity and all that, which is, I mean, I think it's just almost complicit with the whole thing. But what about just one moment of justice? I mean, it ended originally, maybe it's still there, where somebody says, "You got justice?" And he says, "There's no justice." He said, "A jury is just as likely to find a man, to sentence a man for kicking a dog more than he will for killing an Indian." So you get a sense of the. It's a long history in America. It's gone through a lot of stuff, and this I'm very interested in right now because of High Noon, in vengeance. Is that a male characteristic? I'm sure there are females who also want vengeance, but what does that mean? What does that mean about anger and everything? So I'm interested in that. And this thing I'm writing for Marty right now is about kind of what we were brought up to be, we end up being, in a way. And I'm not sure necessarily, but these people were brought up in 1860, 1870 in Sicily, and they went on certain, but they're part of this mafia, and they believe in what this is, and that they're not going to really ever get out of it. Um, and they do what they have to do, or we will do what we do. We must,
Right.
Yeah.
There's a discipline about the questions, a discipline about the themes, like you could take, oh, we're just gonna do a simple theme and somehow it feels shallow or flat, but it seems like my brain doesn't work like this. I can't take a very simple theme and just keep going like I think you can. It's like you have like a faith in the theme and just the ability to
I do.
kind of a
I
stick
believe
with
that's what the
itness.
movie is eventually about. Yeah. And that, so if I get in trouble with the scene, I'll say, how does this apply to the theme of the movie? And I can go far afield or be close to home with it. But to find it interesting as to what are you saying relating to what this movie is supposed to be about,
Mhm.
so that you try not to go too far afield.
What is it that I read about? If you do get stuck, change the weather.
Change the weather. Yeah,
Tell me
that's
about
it.
that. I like that
It's
one.
just very simple. I mean, it's like that's as close as I get to writer's block, is that you're stuck, and I just think, well, I think I'll make it rain. And all of a sudden you look at it differently. It feels like a Sunday afternoon in the rain, or you make it snow, whatever you want to do. I always go to the rain, it seems, but all of a sudden you have people acting slightly differently. And it sort of unlocks to me, or always unlocked me, as to where I can go with this now. Um, they're putting on coats, they're going out, they're putting on a hat, whatever it is. I'm trying to think what I wrote recently I really liked about, it was very windy. It's supposed to be very windy. I got in trouble with the scene I was writing and this thing for Marty, and I decided I'd make it really windy where they are, and people's hats are all coming off. So you have I would like to have 50 hats.
It's like a swirl.
Yeah, they're all swirling around. I think that looked like pretty good.
So the weather, there are other ones that you can
No,
go
I don't
to?
think I don't think I ever did it too much. Um, but I'm big at. I will say that as a corollary to that, I'm big on what time of day it is. So I like, if you're doing something that kind of feels melancholic, maybe have it late in the day, not right before evening, or maybe something at dawn, or dusk. It's like they used to put in the scripts, between. This is a saying from, between the dark and the daylight, when the lights begin to lower, comes a pause in the day's occupation, which is known as the children's hour, as Lillian Hellman. So you get a sense of 5 o'clock on a street in Brooklyn, and about mothers are about to call their kids in for dinner. And there's this pause that kind of everybody's doing, no one's doing anything that may be of any importance, but it's like something that you can almost touch. I love that.
Well, what's cool about your movies is that the moments that really move us as viewers are just kind of everyday moments, which means that I would imagine there's gotta be a sensitivity to life that you have.
Yeah, I think I do, but I don't think I'm as good as there's a writer now named Jack Thorne.
Okay.
Yeah, he wrote Adolescence along with that other writer actor, and he's done 5 or 6 things, and he's quite extraordinary at doing the most uh, basic things within dramatic situations. And I'm not sure I'm as good as him that way. It's kind of a very moving thing he did about. He's big on disabled rights, and
Mm.
he has a thing that was on like BritBox or Acorn TV, about a girl who's like 15, I think, who has I think muscular dystrophy, and she's doomed, and becomes a battle between her parents. About one parent wants to do everything to keep her alive, and he thinks, and she's in a coma now, and the father wants to pull the plug basically. But he then does such normal human things within that's really quite amazing, where it's not always about what the drama is. And like I just liked one little moment where he got in a car and someone got in with him. He's driving him to work, I think, the guy offers him a stick of gum. And he says, no, thanks. He said, yeah, you need it. So it's just like, he had bad breath. You know what I'm saying? It's like he was able to put this humanity in there. It makes you like the characters more and understand them better.
You feel like it's important for every character to be likable, or
No. I think it's, well, look, villains make great movies, if you can find a great villain, you're in good shape. No, I don't think they should be likable. I think you should potentially understand why they are, what makes them tick. Even if you may not always understand it. I mean, I'm not sure I understand psychopaths or something, but you can get close to figuring something out. It gets a little more complicated when people have kind of normal lives where no one's putting their hand in an oven or something, where you're getting hurt, where you're traumatized so badly you want to lash out and kill somebody. You wonder, for instance, about those, and a smarter person than me would have to tell me, those two boys at Columbine who had seemingly a pretty normal life and decent parents. They worked at a pizza parlor and this and that. Why did they decide to go shoot all these people? And I don't know the answer.
Said that a few times. What makes them tick?
Yeah, what makes them tick? Why are they who they are? Yeah. I mean, you're going to start understanding when you read enough about it, sociopaths, right? What's caused it possibly, and who are they? What are psychopaths? But when somebody does something surprising that's not within what you expect, so that makes for really interesting characters, I brought in, I'm not sure how this is going to work, but in this same Marty movie I'm writing, that the lawyer who takes charge of things for our hero, or in quotes, our main character, is a small person. And he's like a great Southern character, And so we'll see how
you got all these Southern characters.
Well, this is a Southern,
New Orleans, 2 movies.
I got this other one's New Orleans. Yeah, it's nothing. It was just a great historical interest in 1890 that happened, and that's just where it was.
Yeah.
The Killers of Flower Moons in Oklahoma. You go where it takes you. I don't think you have a choice about it. And then people act how they were brought up. Then why did the Native Americans were sent to all these Catholic schools, and had their hair cut and all this stuff. I mean, so start building up with the details what these people might become.
Yeah. So you got the beginning of the movie planned out. You got the end of it planned out. Now in the middle, how much surprise?
Middle seems like a great big blob that I have no clue, and then I get me. It's like, what's the next 3 scenes? And I always want to leave the day of writing with a scene I basically lick, so I don't have to go fight with it the next day. I can make it something, hopefully, that'll, soar or not, but at least you'll feel like this is something that's great or good. And I'm going to go approach that the next morning when I woke up. So you're not afraid of, what am I facing here? And so I outline just with one word, like 5 scenes in a row, wedding, shootout, whatever, what I'm saying? That's it. And then it starts taking hold of the story, you want to tell and where you're going. And as you get to the last act as to what, where you're going to end this thing. So you have to try to start building on what is the tension, what is the movement, what do you want to say about the people, what happens to them, how do they feel, So in the beginning, you start exploring who they are, and they may surprise you or may not. And then the middle, you want to sort of do things to me that you're not as sure as you were in the beginning as to who they were, and maybe they're doing things that are even, exceptional or something that confuses you in a way, and then you're back to trying to now finish the whole tale,
As a writer's thinking through scripts, what I'm seeing is there's the character dimension, there's the theme dimension, there's the plot dimension.
Yeah, for me. And dialogue, you have to say what you're saying. And then you also have what it's going to look like visually and sound like. You have to also get back into the music of the pieces and what is the dialogue like. I mean, there's all the degrees. Most of it's and then or you can be just very simplistic and write a story that has maybe even a great theme, and you don't have to have all the stuff that I go into, but that's part of what I enjoy, you know. And some people do it almost effortlessly. They don't have to fight it at all, you know.
You talk about what it's gonna look like. How have you expanded, refined, honed your visual palette?
I don't know. I always had a pretty great visual mind as to what I think would make a good scene. You know, in other words, what would be memorable about New Orleans, for instance, and what would be great. I'm not going to tell you what I did, but it's pretty great. Yeah, it's really great. I mean, I think it's something that's almost expected but unexpected. So that I think it's something that's be very special that people will say, "Oh yeah, remember the scene when they did X, Y, and Z." You know. And then there's things you learn that you didn't know. I didn't realize they had a streetcar already there in 1890. Actually, it was, I think, found in 1840. And so, how do I use a streetcar?
Do you go to New Orleans?
I've been there. I mean, it was on Benjamin Button. I've been there a few times.
Yeah.
On other things, I went. One of my first jobs was to rewrite a Paul Newman movie. I was very young, and they sent me down to Louisiana. And I always tell this story, but I bought a new pair of corduroys and had a faux leather briefcase and walked on the set, and Paul said, "Our savior's here."
Yeah, right.
I was like literally 19 years old or something. It's like a kid. And and it's always exciting, you know, and it's exciting to hear what people, it's exciting to see the movie, hear what the characters are saying, how they interpreted what you wrote, what these genius directors I've been lucky enough to work with, how they envision these things and make them much more, I think, in most cases, more interesting than you imagine it was going to be. Not all cases, but in many, many, many. And then it becomes this whole thing that's an entertainment, you know. And I don't have I mean, I think you can do the same thing on a streamer, this show Adolescence, just because it's contemporary right now, is amazing. The writing, the acting, so that it just makes you think about things that all of a sudden you hadn't thought about and care about things you might not have cared about.
So a place like New Orleans, are you a note taker in terms of
A little bit, not crazy. No, I'll write what I think is the highlights of something, that will remind me what I need to do. You know, like so I'll just write tension. Somebody will say they think we need more tension.
Hmm.
I'll write tension, so I'll know where it came from.
All right, so let's talk about beginning of Forrest Gump. There's nothing but blue sky. A legend appears. A lot of this is true. And we see a feather, lighter than air, floating, like time passing, slowly floating by. It's interesting how you wrote that. Lots of commas. The cadence of that sentence really matches the cadence of that scene. And we see it's over a city. A breeze catches it, moving it here and there above the city. Now, I saw another version of this intro, I swear, that said Savannah explicitly. Maybe that was a later one.
Probably later, because then when they decided where they're going to shoot it,
Yeah, because that's now the feather is the beginning of the movie, the end of the movie. So that's explicit, deliberate, huh? Why a feather?
because I think you can decide that somebody put it there or it's just floating around in a breeze. Yeah, that had to do with the theme of the movie. Um, yeah, so that and where's it going to go next and all that. Yeah, that was smart, if ever, I think.
I think so. So what makes for good intros? Like, if I'm sitting down, I'm ready to write a movie. Like, what should I be focused on in a good intro?
Oh, gee, I don't know. I think it depends on how you want to get the audience into the same thing of writing a book. Why do you what's going to compel people to want to read past page 2? Why? It's like the great ones are it's the best, worst of times, the best of times. You say, oh, or call me Ahab. All these
Right.
great moments that start things that you say, gee, I want to find out more about this. And so that's what I try to do in a kind of literary way. Uh, try to bring people into the environment, sight, sound, etc., and have you start feeling also that you've found a home.
Found a home.
Yeah, that you want to, that you feel comfortable where this is. It might be uncomfortable to you, but you feel like this is somewhere you want to try to, you'd be willing to live for 2 hours. You know what I'm saying? Or it might be something that's frightening to you that you'll say, I want to see what this does to me for a couple hours.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah, I think it's important in some of these movies, when I say find a home, is that you feel comfortable that you're in with Forrest Gump. You know, you find that he's comfortable to you, that he's compassionate in his own way. And with Benjamin Button, it is a home, and they have borders and people, and there's noise and life going on. You know, we almost did this, which I found was kind of lovely, but David decided eventually not to do it. But we were going to end the first Benjamin Button with the end credits were going to be supposedly obituaries from various newspapers of all the characters.
Huh.
And it's spectacular what he had drawn up and everything, you know, from wherever you know, the Times-Picayune, I think, was the New Orleans newspaper, or if they'd moved, you know, like a man hit by lightning 7 times, you know,
Right.
that kind of thing. And it's kind of great. So you have these kind of whole lives that you feel like you've now experienced, you know?
Yeah. When you're teaching the writer's workshop, what do you feel like the writers don't get that you really need to impart on people?
I think part of it's just somebody's, I don't know, ability to just tell a story and try to encourage you to join it and be as attentive and everything. I mean, it's like, I was thinking of a script that I didn't like, one of the writers had, and I think it made you feel like you're not going to be part of this. That somehow it pushes you away. And if you can get people to come in and be a party to it, and you know, they don't have to like it even in a way. I mean, you want them to love it, obviously, and want them to be charmed by it and moved and all those things. But you have to make it so that I think that's why I say they feel like they're home.
Well, here, I mean, I'm just looking at this now. You can see there's a lot of pros here.
Yeah, that's too. They would never let that happen again. How many pages is that script?
Well, this is just one page.
No, I'm just saying, how many pages is the whole script?
Oh, yeah. Let's see. This is 260 something pages. It says cherry revision, so maybe this is a compilation.
That's all. Yeah, so you're gonna have half scenes.
Okay.
There's no way in hell. 266 is, you know, it's a minute a page. So 60 into 260 is a 4.5 hour movie or something.
Right.
That's not happening.
No, this is a compilation.
No, that's a compilation of stuff. Yeah.
How'd you improve your ability to write dialogue?
Well, I don't know if I ever was good or bad at it. I mean, I just write what I think I want them to say. And, you know, and also the director will change a lot of it. Or, I mean, the most impactful one for me was on the movie The Insider. I had written like a 1.5-page monologue that I thought was pretty damn good. Pacino called me that morning before he was going to shoot it. And he said, I can do this with one look. And I said, really? I said, let's call Michael, man. See what Michael says. And Michael said, let's shoot it both ways. And in the movie, it's one look. So he didn't need all the words, you know. But sometimes I'm trying to find ways to describe things that maybe I go overboard or something, you know, or maybe an actor can then take it and make it their own way of speaking. And as long as they're able to impart what you're trying to say, I don't have any big feeling about it.
Right. What are the things that you're thinking about, sort of the axioms, the principles as you're writing dialogue?
Well, I mean, I think you have to carry the scene. You want to present issues in the scene that they're trying to work out or they're romancing about or whatever, so that it becomes, so it becomes valuable. You don't want to just kill time, or what they call shoe leather, you know.
Why is it called that?
Because it's just wasting time walking around, you know.
Okay.
Yeah, you want to have something. It doesn't have to be, you know, gigantic revelation, but you also want to have move the story along. So, you know, like if you have a character say, will you marry me? All of a sudden you're into something that's it could be way larger than what you had anticipated, you know?
Right.
Like this thing I'm writing is, the woman he's in love with is the daughter of his rival, like Romeo and Juliet in a way, and it's dangerous, you know? So as they get closer and closer, it becomes more fraught. Um, and, uh,
Wow.
and eventually the father says, "You're dead to me," you know, so and eventually he may even kill her, you know? So, anyway, so it becomes just more dramatic, I hope.
So simple, your stories, right? Like, I can just hear that, and I can see it, and there's a discipline to simplicity. I think that
Yeah, I wish I had more of it in a way. I mean, some people can really write simply and with such sparse prose and sparse language, but says the same things with so many less words than I use, you know? I'm less sophisticated using language as I wish I was. I mean, but
mm,
that's just some people just like, I'll say I'm mixed about some of his works, but, like Jonathan, what's his name?
Saffron Foer?
No, him I know quite well. We did, Extremely Loud, Incredibly
Right.
Close, yeah. No, he's a good writer, very good. I was thinking more of who wrote Crossroads and Connections, Jonathan, what the hell's his name? It's ridiculous, but he probably writes the best sentences. I mean, I
Mm.
don't know if he spends time looking up words because he uses words I've never heard of, but they seem to come naturally to him. Jonathan Franzen,
Jonathan Franzen.
yeah. But it's natural to him. And when you read you sort of gush because you go, "Oh my God, how did he write this sentence?" And then here comes another one. You know, they're unbelievable. You know, the big deal is with a writer is that you have to put one word in front of another,
Mhm.
and you hope you're putting the right words in the right way. And that's the best lesson you could get. And those who are really good at it are simple, and they're Hemingway or they're, uh, you know, uh, so some of just those writers are just come second nature to them. I don't know what makes it bubble up inside of them, you know?
And what is it about rewriting that feels laborious to you?
Well, you've had the adventure of trying to create something new. So
Mm.
now you're just trying to improve what you've already written, which is fine, but it doesn't feel so adventurous and it's a little more feels more like work.
I think that's revealing that you just said the adventure of creating something new. I think that tells me a lot about how you write.
Yeah, I think it's true. I think I've lived my life that way. Yeah, I've had, a lot of children. I've had more than one wife and things, um and I think a great adventure, and sometimes I haven't behaved the way I should have, but, um, and I've learned what I've learned and decided not to take lessons from what I've learned and all that, you know? But that's with writing too. In other words, trying to create something that will people say, "Wow, this is really" it might be too big, might be too expensive, might be all sorts of things, but they'll never say they're not interesting or a good story.
I don't know why I had the maybe it's because 'cause we're in Santa Monica, I just had the image of, someone who's just, like, surfing a giant wave, and you're kinda like, "I don't know, I'm gonna go," and you kinda, like, come back up, and you're
Yeah.
just on this wave, and the entire time, you're like, "We're just gonna stay on this wave, and I know that if I can stay up, the whole thing's gonna go." But the fact that you're calling it the adventure of trying to figure out something new, I think just says so much about what it is that you're going for and the kind of unfolding, but then you do also know what your destination is because you start with that end in mind.
Well, yeah, but also I'm helped along by since, as I said, I do a lot of, adaptations. I know what the material is to unless I'm creating something. I mean, I think a lot of the things I've written are strict adaptations to some extent, even though I play with them, in major ways, or they're almost all original writing. Like Benjamin Button was just a bad short story that Scott Fitzgerald wrote for he needed some money for Collier's magazine, and but what it was obviously I didn't come up with was the idea of someone aging backwards, which is profound.
Really?
Yeah, it's profound. The closest I came to that in my own writing was I had someone else write it. And we'll see if it ever gets made, but I had someone write it about 10, 15 years ago. So I woke up and I said to my wife, I had this idea. I said, what if I died? You woke up and you found I'm dead and you happen to like me. And you're grieving, and you are with a priest or a rabbi or somebody who could give you some consolation, and you say it, and he says to you or she says to you, "What could I do to make your grief feel, easier to you?" And she says, "I would like to spend just one more day with him."
Mm.
So I had a thing written about a 24-hour where it comes true that this guy who was dead all of a sudden came back to life, and he had 24 hours left to live. And what was their relationship, and what did they get to solve, and what did they get to? It's pretty great.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, it was really beautiful. And as the time compressed, as you're in your last hour, and she knows that he doesn't know it, and things that she wants to accomplish in those moments. And it's pretty beautiful. I don't think it's as profound as aging backwards, but there's something to it that I think was quite touching.
Eric Roth for Forrest Gump.
When you win your Oscar at the very end, you say, "I may not be the
You're
smartest man around."
around, but I know what love is. I sure do. Thank you.
And Forrest Gump says, "I'm not a smart man, but I know what love is."
Yeah, well, I did that because of that. And I do know what love is. For me, I mean, as I say, I have a lot of children, so I know that when they love me, and I love them, and I have many, many, many people in my life. So I'm surrounded by love as best as possible. So yeah, he was saying it quite differently, because he's saying that he's not intelligent, but that he knows what love is.
I mean, I think that's what we see in in a lot of your movies is that feeling of love. I mean, to go to Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close, it's losing your father. Oh my goodness. It's like a sense of just like aching grief and separation, and you really feel the pain of that. And there's something about the way that your movies.
Well, I think it was Elvis Mitchell. You know who that is?
No.
He was a New York Times film critic, and then he does for NPR. He does radio interviews with a lot of entertaining film people, and he's a friend, and he said your movies are all about loneliness.
Yeah.
And I think it's true. Yeah. They're about, when you really think about it, it's just people being, and I'm not sure I'm that lonely, but I don't like being alone. I'm not great with that. But loneliness is probably a driving force. So it might be a driving force for my characters, maybe.
What was wild is after I finished a rewatch button, and after I finished it last week, I wept about things in my own life like I hadn't wept in so long. I
love
mean,
that.
I cried
love that.
out to God.
I love that.
It fully, I was on my bed, and I mean, I practically had to wash the dang
Oh,
pillowcase, because you made me feel certain pains that I've had around loneliness and sadness and feelings of just emptiness in my life. And something about that movie just brought it up. And I just wept. I wept so, like,
well,
when
that's
you're
good, right?
crying
Was
and
it
you're just,
was it cathartic?
you're
for
not
you?
well, that's the thing, when you're just weeping and you're just like, you're completely out of yourself. Like afterwards, it is really nice. And there's something about the shedding of tears is a kind of catharsis. And what's strange is it feels really good to cry that much, because there's no resistance.
Yes.
There's no resistance.
Yeah. Once you can do that, it's important, I think.
Oh, wow.
Wow. Well, I'm glad that it affected you that way.
Yeah.
I love that.
Well, what's wild is that first the movie affected me, and then it showed me something about my own
In a
life.
life, yeah. That's nice. Yeah. Well, then maybe there's some truth to it. Maybe I hit on the truth. I don't know, but I hit on a truth for you anyway. I'm sure there's other people who say it's ridiculous.
Yeah, I just can't even imagine what you experience writing these movies emotionally.
No, I'm moved by them, and a lot of come out of my own life. Things that are painful to me, or how I can experience them. And I mean, it's a lot. Yeah, it's a lot. I was at a panel discussion and at the Writers Guild, and I think I had been nominated for a Writers Guild award. Anyway, that's who the people were. And the moderator started by saying, "I want to be Eric Roth." And I said, "Okay, well, you've had to have had cancer 3 times. You have to have been divorced a few times. You have to had some other tragedies and children and things. And so it was like after a while, it was laughable, so everybody's like laughing because everybody's, has their own stuff. So you may want to be successful in some way, which I am, but it's not, I'm still me.
Do you feel like going through those things makes the grief, the suffering so much more real in your films?
I don't know if that, I don't know. I can't speak to that. I mean, you'd have to, I mean, we have this thing I'm doing with Ben Affleck, which is really interesting. He calls me, he says, I want to do a Mank room. I said, what are you talking about? He says, that movie Mank you wrote, and well, actually David Fincher's father wrote, but we helped it out. Anyhow, and I was a producer on it. And I said, yeah, that's how they did writers' rooms then. That's how they did movies in the 30s and 40s, whatever. They would they'd bring in great writers and they overpaid everybody and they'd sit around in the studio and say, we want a movie about a vampire. So they'd figure out a vampire movie. They'd go away and write. Anyway, he says, yeah, that's what I want to do. I want you to find me, if you're willing to do this, find me like 4 or 5 writers and you be Yoda and let's put together a room. And I'm probably going to pay just basically minimum. So, which made me then my ability to get all the writers I would have maybe liked, even though I ended up great writers, they were all TV writers because they hadn't, they're pretty successful like showrunners and stuff. So we had a room of 4 and I think we got maybe 3 really good scripts out of the 4, which was great. And now he wanted to do it again. So now we have 8 more writers. And so I'm like Yoda to them. And I like doing that, but everybody's different. Yeah, so you learn from everybody else. And on Fridays every week for the duration of our first room anyway, we had a salon and I'd have Fincher came in and Michael Mann and David O. Russell and Bradley Cooper and Rob Reiner and spectacular. But there was no cameras, no nothing, just them talking to the writers and then some guests we had. But the thing that was most consistent about everybody, authenticity. So they wanted authentic. You could be in the most sort of unauthentic Marvel movie and they wanted that to be authentic within that realm. And so that's almost everybody. It's sort of amazing that was the key thing for everybody. So whether that's true or not, I don't know, but that's what it might be right. Yeah.
What is it about collaborations that you've really been drawn to? I mean, you've collaborated with the most insane group of people:
All
Scorsese,
directors.
Spielberg, Fincher. You're talking about Bradley Cooper. We've talked about
No, it's insane.
Michael Mann. Like,
But I think I learned, I'm not stupid, and I learned that directors for me were the key to get movies made. So that I linked up with directors. They happened to like my material, so I was a leg up on that. I wrote a movie for Kurosawa. Yeah, called Rhapsody in August. Yeah, I've worked with the best actors and best directors for the 60 years I've been at it. There's a bunch of people I wish I had worked with, probably, but yeah. And each one's different. It's a marriage though. You have to be willing to get married.
what'd you learn from Spielberg?
Some things I won't say, but I'll say he has a incredible sense of entertainment. Also, being able to portray things, with that 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 are childlike in some ways, um, and the entertainment value of his work is incredible. He can do what I call Rube Goldberg. He can do like a maze of things. He can have. I think his Saving Private Ryan had a thing in where someone got shot on a thermos and the blood was dripping and something else happened. I don't know. He can do that. In other words, he can reach for a box of cereal and 12 other things happen.
Right.
Yeah, he's very talented that way. He's very quiet. He's a lonely sort of man in a way. Nice man, but he lives in his own world to some extent. But they're all different. Everybody's some are more generous, some are less generous. but it's a marriage you have to find a way to negotiate in a way, because as strong as you may feel about something, eventually it's the director who's gonna make a decision. And, so I like to find what I say is like the third rail or the third way where we then both can agree on what we'd like it to look like, you know? And that doesn't always happen, you know? And sometimes I'm disappointed and sometimes I'm thrilled and, you know? So I continue to work with directors as much as I can. I'll work with Denis Villeneuve again, and
That's right, yeah.
yeah, I'll work with, Marty again, I hope. We're just getting pretty old, both of us, so we'll see. Uh, and I'd like to there's a few new directors I would like maybe to work with, you know, but, they're all there.
You said to me in the kitchen, I always enjoy the writing. I always enjoy the
I love
writing.
the writing. Yeah, I like every day I enjoy it.
And is that because of the topics that you choose? Like,
Part of it, yeah, I go into worlds that I love trying to negotiate.
and what do? You just wait for the pitch, and then you kinda, like, find the fat pitch and you just kinda go for it? Or, like, what
No,
is
I
contributing
I
to
have
that?
an idea of what I wanna write, what's the goal in the thing, and then it is true what you said, though, as you know, going back to page 1, I know the first time I go and write it, it's not right. And what is the story I'm telling? Why is it going this way? Why is it stopping? How can I do this better? Then all these details start filling in,
Mm.
and I say, I like this, you know?
Okay, tell me more about the details
Well, the
filling in.
details just pop up when you're doing, you know, like 1860 Sicily, you know, and then you start reading about, well, they were fighting for citrus. Who was going to control the citrus crop? And the winner was eventually this one family. And as I love this detail, as a sign of their victory, they put a lemon on top of their gate. I mean, it was a tall gate, but a lemon on top, and that made them the victors. And I don't know. And so I had a scene where in this thing I have a scene where our hero, or I'm not sure he's so heroic, but anyway, the lead in the movie is wants vengeance on a rival don, and he comes sneaking into an opera, and while the opera is going, I have him slit his throat, and the guy whose throat he's slitting is a guy who fancies himself as kind of a singer, so he's doing a baritone with the opera singer. Yeah, so that was pretty good.
Wait, so how in the world with, like, 1860s Italy, like, I wouldn't even know how to think through character. I mean, I guess you can read a lot, but
I read some, but
there's
also
so
I
much.
just envision, well, let's say it's an amphitheater, so it's outdoors I did it, you know,
Yeah.
because they had outdoor amphitheater. It's supposed to be a small kind of town, and he sneaks behind this guy, this kind of rotund guy who's sort of full of himself and unscrupulous guy who probably deserves to get killed if you believe in that stuff, and he has and I have him cut his throat. So what I did then was, because that wasn't enough for me, I have that the opera singer is the only person who saw him cut his throat. So he has this for the rest of our movie, and he becomes a slightly instrumental character because the whole group of them are come to New Orleans because for various reasons, they brought all these Sicilians to New Orleans, and that's where the mafia started in America. But yeah, this guy knows that he cut this guy's throat, and he has that on him in a certain way. Yeah.
How deliberate are you about cultivating inspiration? I mean, we've talked a lot about, you mentioned Proust, you read a lot of novels, you watch a lot of movies. There's thousands of references you can pull from. Is that something that's deliberate, or is that sort of a
That's deliberate. I mean, but it's also I like to even quote things that because I'm just so moved by them, so I like to use them, like that Lillian Hellman thing I said to you.
Yeah.
You know, I think I'd use that in a couple scripts, but because I just love it. It's just so textural and everything else, and I mean, I've quoted other things or used them where I'll give credit. I mean, I don't plagiarize them. I'll say, and so said, you know, um, or describe something, and I just think it makes it more I think it makes a richer reading experience for the readers, you know, because most people now just read the dialogue. They avoid the rest of it.
The reader. So as you're trying to shop the film.
Yeah, you have that also. So you have to make a script for a readers, for somebody to say, oh boy, I see this. I can see why I would want to make it, aside from whatever their judgment is about the commerciality of it, what the expense is, and how long is it going to be, all those things, you know.
Earlier, you were talking about things standing the test of time. How do you think about making something perennial?
Well, I think you can't know, but I think certain things like, I think Forrest Gump survived and continues because I think parents show it to their 11-year-old.
That's what happened to me.
Yeah, so their 11-year-olds love it, and you censor out the little bit of sexuality in it, right?
Right.
You know, or just say,
I actually didn't realize until I was preparing for this that Forrest Gump's mom had sex with the principal.
That's
So
right.
I learned that this morning,
Yeah,
and I was
yeah.
like, I've seen that movie like 5 times.
I know, yeah.
Somehow had
We
no
laughed,
idea.
Bob and I laughed. We can do something for you, Mrs. Gump. Anyhow,
I had no idea.
yeah, so, but anyway, I think that's why that's persisted. You know, Benjamin Button, we'll see. I think maybe the loveliness of it will make it persist, but I don't think you can know. And certain things last and certain things don't. I mean, I could tell you that I think Star is Born has really lasted, and it's outlasted the movies that, like the movie that won Best Picture, The Green Book. I'd say I defy anybody to have the same feeling about it. They may like Green Book or whatever they like it. But I think Star is Born, though, because the music and Lady Gaga and all that makes it still feel very fresh, you know. I don't know. I'm not sure about Dune, whether it'll last the same way. I don't know. Dune 1 and 2, I don't know.
Did you write Dune 2?
No, I told him I had other worlds to conquer. Which was funny, I thought.
How do you think about the premise? Like, is that something that you're looking for a lot? Because that's what you found with Benjamin Button. We've been talking about characters.
Well,
but the premise.
the premise. I think the premise comes along with when you're adapting something.
Right.
So there's something in it that I'm going to do a Sydney Sweeney movie. That,
Oh, wow.
Yeah, she found this wonderful short story called "I Pretended to Be a Missing Girl." So the premise is of a sort of down and out 20-year-old, sleeps around and like drugs or alcohol, and sees on a motel lobby a poster for a missing girl amongst other posters, and the girl kind of looks like her, and she says, I think I'll go sort of scam this family and get some money from them and get the hell out of there. So she goes to the family and knows enough about the girl and learns enough about her to where the parents want her back so bad that they're convinced it is her. And she's going in to meet her younger brother, who's like 9 years old. And the younger brother says to her, run as fast as you can. And it's spectacular what happens.
So when you hear a premise like that, what is your thought? Is it like that?
I love this.
Was it juicy? Is it that you can do something with it?
It's juicy. It's it makes me. It also, I was interested in doing something that I could get made rather quickly, as I'm 80 years old. So I mean, I'm running out of time here. So I thought with her being a big movie star and this kind of idea, which I think I could build on. I already said, well, it shouldn't be just this girl's missing photograph there. It should be hers too. So in other words, we know that she's a missing person and have her, then maybe I'll do it. That's probably how I'll start the movie. And they'll have her go park out in front of her home and you'll see her mother and father and she'll eventually leave, you know.
Now, as you think about themes for that movie, based on what you said.
I'm not sure what that is yet because I don't know. That may just be a pot boiler. You know, some things are just Hitchcock movies or something,
right.
You know. So I'm not sure. I'll probably find something in it. I want the villain, which is the father, because he actually has his daughter in the basement. But I want him to be so evil but he's intelligently evil, like Silence of the Lambs. So he's a great kind of, you have this dynamic between these two people, you know. I know that. That's what I know so far.
And is your writing you're still writing on that program that gives you no
Yeah,
access to the
that's it.
internet that was invented by the Egyptians, right?
Yeah, it's a DOS program
Yeah.
that, the worst part about it is it runs out of memory,
At, like, 40 pages or
like 40
something?
pages.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you know at least you've got an act written, so but you better print it out or it's gonna go away is a problem. Because once it'll so all of a sudden it'll say too much memory or something, overloaded memory, and it'll make pages disappear.
Yeah.
So you don't wanna get there, you know? Yeah. But I'm just superstitious. I should probably learn how to use Final Draft and call it a day, but
And then what do you do? You print and you just
I print it and then my assistant retypes it.
based on your edits.
Yeah, well, I have edits and then we'll edit together and I'll keep going through it till I'm gonna turn it in and she'll retype it. Because I do my movie program is the bulk of the writing, but I'll also because, it's when you're a writer, I say most or it's 24 hours a day, it's on your mind. And so I'll like put an email, I'll write a scene in email or in text and just on a scrap of paper or something. So it's always evolving in some way, you hope, or you think of something, oh my God, I got to put that in. I realized they had left out something in the script. It was a little tiny thing, but so I had to run back but I wrote myself a note so I didn't forget it. Yeah.
And how much of what you write comes out of your own life, conversations that you have?
Not that much, I don't think. I mean, it depends probably if depends on the milieu. In other words, if it's something that's more I wrote not a very successful movie called Lucky You, which is a poker player. I know a lot about gambling, and so I could put a lot of stuff I knew in there, but um, that was because of the subject matter. I also had a television show on called Luck with my lovely David Milch, and that was about horse racing, which I know a lot about. So I could put all sorts of stuff in that.
You feel like you learn more from the successes or the failures?
I don't know. I think it's a different question you'd have to ask a different writer because I've had so many movies made. I mean, and that I'm not, and a lot of things that were not successful. That it becomes, I don't want to say less important, but not as important in a certain way. That the writing is equally important to me, or maybe even more important. That I can create something that's new and different, and explores areas and all that I love about it. Um, and if it doesn't work, then I probably missed something, which is fine. And I don't have the same ego that way in it. Now I just love to do the work without questioning what's going to happen with it, even though I still care. And it's sort of meaningless to have a screenplay that's not going to be filmed.
Mhm.
It's just going to go on a drawer. So I don't know. That's a great question. What you learned from when you made mistakes. I'm not sure if you don't try to start attributing those mistakes to others. It's
Mhm.
a good cheap way out,
Right.
to a director, or the actors didn't do the right, or they didn't cast the right people, and I don't know.
Do you feel like the market for movie popularity, the Oscars, is efficient? And what I mean by that is, if you were to take your most popular movies, how much does that correlate with what you feel are the best movies?
Oh, my movies?
Yeah.
I think each year is different as to what I would say is a movie maybe I would have rather have written. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But that's something that's not in my.
But do you feel like the movies that you're known for that are the most popular, are those your best movies? Or do you feel like there's these other movies that either didn't get picked up, they didn't do well, we are like, "Dang, that was a darn good script."
I have a few of those. I have a pretty ridiculous batting average, so for getting movies made, so I don't have that many scripts that haven't been made,
Mhm.
so I can't harken back to that. I mean, I'm batting, I don't know what, pretty high.
Mhm.
It's gone a little less as they uh, make less and less movies.
Right.
Yeah, so it's harder to get them made.
I love the line from Button. They're at the funeral. "She taught me to play the piano and what it meant to miss somebody." Very you line.
Yeah, that is. I like that line. I think one of the lines I remember from that movie, and I don't remember exactly what he said, was when the tugboat captain's dying, he says, "You can rail at God," and something like that. And he says, "When it comes to the end, you have to make peace." And basically, that one I like. Yeah, yeah.
Thanks for doing this.
Thanks for doing it.
Good time.
Thank you. Lovely question. It's really good job.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is better than the normal one.